The salt was the first thing I noticed when I moved to Seacliff Estates. Not the biting, fishy smell of a working harbor, but a clean, mineral scent that clung to the air. A constant reminder of the vast, sapphire expanse of the Atlantic just beyond my back lawn. It was the scent of peace, I thought. After 30 years of designing systems to fight the ocean, I was finally ready to just sit and listen to it. My wife, Eleanor, would have loved it. The house was her dream. A modest but sturdy two-story home perched on a low bluff, with panoramic windows that drank in the light and the endless horizon. We'd picked it out on a map years ago, a promise of a quiet life after a career spent in concrete-dusted command centers and storm-battered coastlines. Now, I was here alone, with only her memory and the rhythmic crash of waves on the shore below for company. The quiet lasted exactly 3 days. On the fourth day, as I was supervising the delivery of the first load of marine-grade composite pilings, a gleaming white Range Rover pulled into my driveway with the silent, predatory grace of a shark. The door opened, and out stepped a woman who seemed to be sculpted from pure, unyielding opinion. She was tall, rail-thin, with a blonde bob so severe it looked like it could cut glass. Her face was a mask of expensive, sun-weathered tightness, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanned my property with an expression of profound disapproval. She was dressed in tennis whites that had clearly never seen a court, and a large, gold C dangled from a chain around her neck. "Arthur Finch?" she asked. Her voice wasn't a question, but an accusation. "That's me," I said, offering a hand that she completely ignored. I let it drop, feeling the grit of the driveway dust on my palm. "I'm Carolyn Vance," she announced, as if presenting a royal title. "I'm the president of the Seacliff Estates Homeowners Association." She gestured vaguely at the truck unloading the long, gray pilings. "And what, exactly, is all this?" "This," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly, "is the foundation for a seawall. The geological survey I commissioned showed significant undercutting at the base of the bluff. Without reinforcement, this property, and likely the two next to it, could see serious erosion within the next 5 to 10 years. Carolyn's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "A seawall," she repeated, tasting the words as if they were poison. "Mr. Finch, perhaps you haven't had a chance to read the Seacliff covenants, conditions, and restrictions yet. They were included in your closing documents. Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 7, clearly states that no structure of any kind may be erected that impedes, obstructs, or otherwise alters the natural scenic vista of the shoreline." She had the section memorized. Of course she did. "I assure you, Ms. Vance, I've read them," I said calmly. "The wall is being designed to be as low profile as possible. The final height will be less than 3 feet above the high tide line. From up here, it will be barely visible. It's a necessity for preserving the integrity of the property line." "The integrity of the property line is secondary to the integrity of our view," she snapped, her voice losing its polite veneer and gaining a sharp, metallic edge. "We did not pay 7 figures for our homes to look at a concrete barrier. We paid for unobstructed ocean. That is the entire point of Seacliff Estates. It is a non-negotiable aesthetic." I took a slow breath, inhaling the salt air that was suddenly feeling less peaceful. "This isn't about aesthetics," I explained patiently. "It's about physics, hydrodynamic scour. The eddy currents created by that small headland to the south are focusing wave action directly at the base of this bluff. It's a classic case of differential erosion." She stared at me, her face a blank wall. The technical terms meant nothing to her. I was speaking the language of science and engineering. She was speaking the language of power and control. They were mutually unintelligible. You will submit an application to the Architectural Review Committee before another piece of this material is unloaded, she commanded. And I can tell you right now, it will be denied. We have rules for a reason. Mr. Finch, they protect our property values. An industrial-looking wall is not on the list of approved improvements. I have all the necessary permits from the city and the County Coastal Commission, I said, gesturing towards the small stack of official documents on the dashboard of my truck. The HOA covenants can't supersede municipal safety regulations. A flicker of something dark and unpleasant passed through her eyes. It was the look of a monarch whose divine right had just been questioned by a peasant. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing purr. "This community has standards. You will find we are very, very serious about our standards. You should have considered that before you decided to build your personal fortress. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Finch." She turned without another word, slid back into her Range Rover, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a palpable sense of hostility in her wake. The truck driver, a burly man with a faded tattoo of an anchor on his forearm, let out a low whistle. "Wow," he said. "HOA president. Huh. Looks like you've got a live one there, buddy." I looked from the retreating luxury SUV to the gray composite pilings lying on my lawn tools of salvation. In my eyes, to Carolyn Vance, they were an act of war. I sighed. All I had wanted was a quiet place to watch the tides, to remember my wife, to finally be at rest. It seemed I had inadvertently moved onto a battlefield, and the first shot had just been fired. The first official volley from Carolyn arrived 2 days later, delivered by a certified letter that felt unnecessarily formal and aggressive. It was a notice of violation, printed on thick, cream-colored letterhead, embossed with the Seacliff Estates logo, a stylized wave cresting over a setting sun. The irony was not lost on me. The letter cited 3 separate bylaws I had supposedly breached: obstruction of the scenic vista, use of non-conforming materials, and unauthorized commercial activity. Attached was a fine for $500, with a stern warning that it would double every 7 days. My first instinct was weary frustration. I had spent a career navigating complex bureaucracies, negotiating with generals and ministers. The thought of getting bogged down in a petty war with a neighborhood committee was profoundly exhausting. But then, I looked out my window at the crumbling edge of the bluff, a line of sandy soil that had receded nearly a foot since the last winter storm, and my resolve hardened. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about preventing a disaster I could see coming as clearly as if it were a simulation on one of my old lab supercomputers. I spent that evening drafting a response with the same meticulous precision I would use for a federal contract proposal. I was professional and dispassionate. I addressed each alleged violation point by point. For the Scenic Vista Clause, I included a series of sightline diagrams I'd rendered on my computer, showing that from her property and the 2 adjacent ones, the final seawall would appear as nothing more than a thin, dark line, virtually invisible except at low tide. For the aesthetic palette violation, I attached the manufacturer's spec sheet for the composite materials, which could be tinted to match the dark, wet rock of the existing shoreline, arguing that resilience and safety should be considered part of the community's harmony. As for the commercial activity, I simply attached a copy of my city-issued building permit, which legally sanctioned the presence of my contractors. I concluded the letter with a polite but firm statement. While I respect the HOA's desire to maintain a beautiful community, The structural integrity of the coastline and the safety of the homes built upon it must be the primary concern. The ongoing construction is a fully permitted, non-negotiable safety requirement. Therefore, I will not be paying the associated fine, as the violations are cited in error. I printed it on my own letterhead plane. Simple, with just my name. Arthur Finch, P.E. At the top. The P.E. for professional engineer was a small, quiet assertion of expertise. I sent the response via certified mail, creating a paper trail. It was a small, satisfying act of defiance, a perfectly argued rebuttal. A week passed in relative quiet. The construction continued. The rhythmic, thudding sound of the sonic pile driver, a music to my ears. It was the sound of safety, of solid foundations. Then came the response. It was not a letter, but another fine, this time doubled to $1,000, with new, even more petty violations added for noise pollution, and for my garbage cans being visible from the street for too long. It was clear she hadn't even read my detailed response. This was not a negotiation. It was a siege. I sent back another, more curt refusal. A brief transitional scene unfolded as I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The beauty was tinged with a sense of foreboding. This wasn't just about a wall anymore. It was about her absolute refusal to be wrong, to have her authority questioned. I was no longer just building a defense against the ocean. I was being forced to build one against my neighbor. The peace I had sought felt further away than ever. The second phase of her attack came under the cloak of a moonless, overcast sky. I was woken just after 2 a.m. by a strange sound, a sharp rattle, a metallic hiss. My old instincts, honed by years of sleeping on volatile project sites, kicked in. I was out of bed in an instant, flicking on the back floodlights. My heart sank. The clean, gray forms for the concrete cap beam were now defaced with streaks of lurid red spray paint. HOA violator. But that wasn't the worst of it. Near the edge of the bluff was a small patch of soil I had tilled myself. In it, I had planted 3 sterling silver rose bushes. Eleanor's favorite. We'd always had them, in every home we'd ever lived in. They were the one piece of her living memory I had brought to this new life. Now, they were hacked to pieces, their thorny stems lying limp on the ground, the blossoms crushed into the damp earth. It was a vicious, calculated act of cruelty, aimed not at the wall, but at me. It was a message: I know what matters to you, and I can destroy it. A cold, methodical calm washed over my grief. I went back inside, grabbed my high-resolution digital camera, and began to document everything with the detached precision of a forensic investigator. I photographed the graffiti, the discarded spray cans, and the brutalized remains of the roses. The next morning, I filed a police report for vandalism. The deputy was dismissive. Probably kids. He shrugged, but I now had an official record of the event. That afternoon, I didn't just buy a few off-the-shelf security cameras. I called a specialized security firm I'd used on sensitive government projects. I had a state-of-the-art system installed, high-definition, night vision cameras with motion sensors, all feeding into a secure, encrypted recorder. One high-powered varifocal lens model was positioned on the corner of my roof, with a perfect, clear view of Carolyn Vance's back deck. My quiet sanctuary was now a fortress under surveillance. My retirement had become a counterintelligence operation. This was the mini-climax of the scene, the definitive shift from passive victim to active strategist. I was no longer just reacting. I was gathering ammunition. Having failed with official intimidation and covert vandalism, Carolyn moved the battle to the social front. The first sign came from an awkward encounter with a neighbor, Tom, at the grocery store. He nervously mentioned that Carolyn had been posting updates on the community Facebook page, accusing me of using toxic materials and destabilizing the entire bluff with my construction. She was manufacturing a panic, positioning herself as the protector of the community while casting me as the reckless, selfish villain. The social climate grew colder overnight. Neighbors who had once waved now averted their eyes. I was being ostracized. The campaign culminated in the annual Seacliff Estates Labor Day barbecue. I knew it would be an ordeal, but not showing up would be seen as an admission of guilt. The moment I stepped onto the manicured community lawn, a chill descended. Conversations faltered. And then there was Carolyn, holding court, a triumphant smile on her face. She let me stand in isolation for a full 10 minutes before she made her move. She approached, flanked by 2 other women, her expression one of mock concern. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We were all so worried. Linda was just telling me she thinks she saw some of your chemical barrels leaking onto the beach this morning." The woman, Linda, nodded eagerly. "It looked like a nasty slick. I'm worried about the poor birds." It was a breathtakingly audacious lie, delivered to a captive audience. "There are no chemical barrels. Carolyn," I said, my voice low and steady. "And you know that. Every material on site is inert and environmentally approved." Carolyn placed a hand on her chest in a gesture of wounded innocence. "There's no need to be defensive. We're just concerned for the community's safety. After all, none of us are experts. We don't know what kind of damage your project could be doing to the cliff we all live on." Her eyes glittered with malice. She had successfully framed the narrative. Any defense I offered would sound like the protestations of a guilty man. She had painted me as a liar and a danger in front of everyone. It was a public humiliation, a perfectly executed social assassination. I stood there for a moment, the weight of 30 pairs of hostile eyes on me, feeling utterly alone. It was a powerful emotional low point, a mini-climax of social defeat. I gave a single, curt nod, turned without a word, and walked away, the sound of their suddenly cheerful, relieved chatter following me back to my empty house. That night, I called my old friend, General Mark Miller. "She's trying to break you, Arthur," he said, after I recounted the story. "She can't beat you on the facts, so she's trying to beat you on morale. Don't let her. Remember who you are. You faced down typhoons and political coups. You're not going to be run out of town by a bully with a Facebook page." His words were a necessary balm, shoring up my resolve for the next inevitable assault. Carolyn's next campaign was a war of attrition, waged through official channels. It began with a visit from a city inspector named Frank, responding to a third-party complaint that my construction was exceeding the bounds of its permit. Frank was a man with a perpetually weary expression. But after a thorough review of my immaculate plans and a walk of the site, he stamped my paperwork with a "no violation found" mark. As he was leaving, he paused, looking at my name on the plans. "Wait a minute. Are you the Arthur Finch Davenport I studied your papers on thixotropic soil liquefaction at Georgia Tech? Your work is legendary." The moment of recognition was a small but deeply satisfying victory. "I'm just trying to keep my house from falling into the ocean," I said. Frank shook his head. "And your HOA president is trying to stop you. The irony is thicker than concrete." He promised to note in the file that future complaints from this source should be treated with extreme skepticism. But Carolyn was relentless. The visit from Frank was just the first shot. In the following weeks, a parade of officials arrived at my gate, each summoned by an anonymous, hysterical complaint. An agent from the State Environmental Protection Agency came, responding to a tip about me dumping toxic waste. He spent 2 hours on site and left, declaring it one of the cleanest residential construction sites he'd ever seen, and noting that the state had been trying to get homeowners to build proper defenses like mine for years. 2 days later, an OSHA inspector arrived, investigating a complaint that I was forcing my crew to work in unsafe conditions. My foreman, Carlos, laughed in her face. "Ma'am," he said. "Mister, Finch's safety briefings are longer than my first wedding. We follow his rules because he knows what he's talking about." Each visit ended the same way, with another official report exonerating me. Another piece of paper added to the growing evidence binder on my desk. It became a grim routine, a constant stream of interruptions designed to wear me down. This wasn't about winning for her anymore. It was simply about the fight. One evening, I stood in my office, looking at the binder, now thick with official reports, copies of her threatening letters, and stills from the security footage. I realized this campaign of bureaucratic harassment was a sign of her desperation, and it told me that the final confrontation, the direct, personal threat, was all she had left. The final escalation came on a cool, gray Thursday afternoon. The sky was the color of lead, and a strong wind was whipping off the ocean. Carrying the promise of a coming storm system, the weather channels were starting to call Hurricane Delia. The crew had packed up early. I was alone when Carolyn marched onto my deck, her face pale and tight with fury. She was holding a thick manila folder. "This is your last chance, Finch," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Tear it down. Now." I stood my ground. "We've been over this, Carolyn. The wall is staying." "Then I will destroy you," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier theatrics, replaced by something cold and deadly serious. She opened the folder and slapped it down on my patio table. It was a dossier. On me. It contained printouts from my old company's website, articles about my career, and a list of my professional affiliations. It also contained a list of names and contact information for the current board members of Finch Davenport, for editors at major news outlets, and for the heads of several engineering societies. "I've drafted a press release," she sneered, "and several very detailed letters. Famed engineer destroys pristine coastline, endangers community. I will paint you as a reckless, arrogant fraud who is an enemy to the environment. I will personally call every person on this list and ruin the name you spent a lifetime building." She leaned closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "And then there's the lawsuit. We will use the full resources of this HOA to bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. We will take this house. You are one man. We are a community. You cannot win." This was it. The ultimatum. Her final, most vicious attack, aimed at my legacy and my livelihood. I stood there for a long moment, the wind howling around us, and I looked past her, out at the horizon. The sea was a dark, angry gray, streaked with white foam. The waves were building, crashing against the base of my nearly completed wall with a percussive boom that you could feel in your chest. The sound seemed to give me strength. She thought her weapons were slander and lawsuits. She had no idea who the real enemy was. I finally met her gaze. My expression was no longer tired or patient. It was as cold and hard as the bedrock beneath my feet. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. Her confident sneer faltered, confused by my lack of fear. "You have 24 hours to begin demolition," she said, recovering, "or I begin mine." I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you for making your position clear." "Carolyn," I said. My calmness seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. She searched my face for a crack, but found none. She turned and stalked off my deck. I remained where I was. The first cold, heavy drops of rain beginning to fall. The preliminary bands of Hurricane Delia were arriving. She thought she had given me an ultimatum. In reality, she had just given me the final piece of evidence I needed. The day of the storm broke with an eerie, bruised light. The sky was a swirling vortex of dark gray and sickly yellow clouds. At 10 a.m., an email blast from the HOA arrived. Urgent community meeting. 11:00 a.m. sharp. Topic: emergency action. Regarding the unauthorized and dangerous shoreline structure at 214 Ocean Drive. Meeting on the Vance front lawn. Vote on emergency levy for immediate demolition. It was insanity. Pure, spectacular hubris. In the face of a Category 3 hurricane, she was holding a public meeting to tear down the one thing that could save them. She wanted to publicly humiliate me as her grand finale. I spent the next 45 minutes not in panic, but in focused, cold preparation. I packed a portable, high-lumen projector, a collapsible screen, and a battery-powered PA system. It was time for Dr. Finch to give a lecture. At 10:55, I walked onto her lawn. About 30 miserable-looking residents were huddled under umbrellas. Carolyn stood on her porch, triumphant. "This is a private meeting," she shrieked as I set up my gear. "I'm not here to debate bylaws." "Carolyn," I said, my voice suddenly booming through the PA system, cutting through the howl of the wind. "I'm here to present some data." Before she could respond, an image of a topographical map of Seacliff Estates appeared on my screen. "This," I began, my voice ringing with authority, "is our community. It is composed primarily of sandstone and compacted glacial till. It is highly susceptible to erosional scour." I clicked a button, showing a time-lapse of the receding shoreline. "Now, let's talk about Hurricane Delia." I projected the NOAA storm surge model, a terrifying, deep red blob centered on our coast. The forecast predicts a storm surge of 12 to 15 feet, topped with 25 to 30-foot waves. This is a battering ram of water. I switched to my own simulation, showing the bluff being undercut, then collapsing, taking the first row of houses with it. The crowd was dead silent now, their faces a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. "You've been worried about my wall blocking the view," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "The only thing my wall was designed to do is prevent the undercutting that will destroy your homes." "It's fake," Carolyn shrieked. "He's just trying to scare you." "Is it fake, Carolyn?" I asked, and clicked the remote. The image on the screen changed to crystal clear, high-definition video of her spray painting my property. I let it play, then switched to the footage of her on my deck, threatening me. Her own venomous words echoed across her lawn. "I will drag your name through the mud. We will take this house." A collective gasp went through the crowd. They turned as one to stare at Carolyn, whose face had gone the color of ash. "My name," I said, my voice now a command, "is Dr. Arthur Finch. For 32 years, I was the lead coastal defense strategist for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I founded the firm that designed the storm surge barriers for New Orleans after Katrina and the tsunami defenses for Fukushima. I am not a hobbyist. This is a bespoke coastal defense system, and it's the only reason my house will still be here tomorrow." A deafening crack of thunder punctuated my statement. Panic erupted. The residents scattered, screaming, running for their homes. Only Carolyn and her husband remained, frozen on their porch. She stared at me, her face a mask of utter soul-shattering horror. She hadn't just picked a fight with a retired engineer. She had declared war on one of the world's foremost experts, on the very force that was about to obliterate her. The first monster wave crashed over the bluff edge further down the coast. The sound was a physical blow. The ocean was here. And her million-dollar view was now a front-row seat to the abyss. The aftermath was a scene of apocalyptic devastation. When the sun rose, it revealed a coastline that had been violently rewritten. My house stood firm, an island of stability in a sea of ruin. The seawall, though battered, had held. The waves had broken against it, their ferocious energy dissipated, saving the bluff behind it. The same could not be said for the rest of Seacliff Estates. The first row of houses, including Carolyn Vance's opulent mansion, was simply gone. Where her sprawling deck had once been, there was now just a raw, muddy cliff face dropping into the sea. The front half of her house had been sheared off, leaving a grotesque, dollhouse-like view of her ruined living room, open to the sky. Legally, Carolyn and the HOA board members who had supported her were ruined. The remaining homeowners filed a massive class action lawsuit. My video evidence of her vandalism and threats, combined with the official reports from the city, EPA, and OSHA, formed an unassailable case. The suit alleged gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, and they were stripped of their assets. Carolyn Vance, the Queen of Seacliff, lost everything. Socially, she was an outcast. The neighbors she had manipulated now looked at her with pure hatred. The last I saw of her, she was packing boxes into a U-Haul truck, her face a haggard, empty mask. The HOA was dissolved in disgrace and eventually reformed with a new charter. The first motion passed was a formal, public apology to me, and a request for me to consult on a new, comprehensive coastal protection plan for the entire community. Quietly and without fanfare, I agreed. The community began to heal, humbled and united by the shared trauma. They looked at my seawall not as an eyesore, but as a symbol of foresight. I finally found the peace I had sought. It wasn't the peace of solitude, but the richer peace of a community reborn. I would sit on my deck in the evenings, watching the now calm ocean, the scent of salt in the air. The rhythmic crash of the waves was no longer just a sound. It was a conversation, a dialogue between the land and the sea that I now felt a part of. Eleanor would have loved it. Not the drama, but the quiet, resilient strength of the aftermath. The wall stood, the house stood, and I was finally home.